Good afternoon, Father. Father James Martin, New York Times best-selling author, who's on the other line. How are you, Father?
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. It's a real honor to have a discussion with you, and all the amazing stuff that you've done. But how are you, Father, first of all? It must have been a great journey, a long journey for you overall.
Yeah, I mean, I started off as a non-religious person, really. I was a
Hmm.
Catholic, and I never thought of becoming a priest or a Jesuit. But life worked out this way, and this is the way God called me. I'm doing well. I just came off an 8-day silent retreat, so I'm doing pretty well.
Fantastic, Father. I want to start off on this podcast discuss about you and also your life and how you first started going into spirituality because as you know everyone goes through different journeys to become the man they are today. What made you get into spirituality and also at the same time become a priest? And how did that spirituality come to your life?
Well, I grew up Catholic, but not in a super religious family. As I said, I did not go to Catholic schools. I went to the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business and worked for 6 years at General Electric, formerly great and influential company. And I just started to feel less and less that I was in the right place. And I started to look around for something else to do, but I really couldn't figure out what that something else was. And I came into contact with the writings of the Trappist monk Thomas Merton,
Hmm.
who wrote in the 1940s and 50s. And the trajectory of his life, from kind of a disillusioned college student, he spent some time in the UK at Cambridge, to, a Trappist monk really appealed to me. And it just seemed kind of romantic. And I started to think more and more about doing something different and then ended up as a Jesuit priest. So it was really kind of being dissatisfied with the corporate world and finding a religious world a little more appealing and, as I said, kind of almost romantic.
Did God in terms of, people have this saying, when people walk into spirituality, when they're not, even though they've, as you said, you came from a Catholic, tradition, but at the same time, obviously becoming a priest. Did God give you a message? Did you have a hearing? Because people say, well, sometimes there's a message out there or a sign. Did you get a sign?
Yeah, not exactly. I think some people tend to think of it as you see a vision or you hear a voice or something. I certainly didn't. I certainly have never had anything like that. But I think, and I have experiences in prayer, but they're all interior. There's nothing, I've never seen a vision or heard a voice.
Hmm.
I think the way to look at it is that God also works through our desires. God works, how does God call a person to be a journalist? Well, you're interested in it, right? I mean, you're interested in it. You like to write, you like to read, you like to
Hmm.
investigate things. That's a kind of call. How does a person become a doctor? Well, they're interested in the body and medicine and all those kinds of things. And in those desires and in those attractions, I think God works. That's kind of the call. So the call
Hmm.
for me was, I'm interested and I find appealing the Jesuits and the priesthood and religious life. So that's the idea. That's kind of what the call means. It's a kind of desire, really. And you could say the same about married couples too. They're called towards each other, with that kind of a different kind of desire, but a
Hmm.
desire nonetheless. So yeah, I think through desire and attraction is the way God calls people.
You've also become a very accomplished writer. You've written numerous of op-eds for the New York Times, and also at the same time you're an editor of a very well-known large magazine in the US. How do you feel going from being a priest to a writer, and how have you managed to combine it both together?
Well, that's a great question. I see it as a what you might call a vocation within a vocation, right? So
Hmm.
my main vocation is as a Jesuit and as a priest, but I also discovered this, capacity for writing. It's
Hmm.
also part of what you might call the ministry of the word that a priest would do. So a priest preaches and, talks about the scriptures and the Bible and Jesus. And it is a continuation of that, right? It's a
Hmm.
continuation in a different form. So in addition to preaching, and talking to people one on one, which I still do, of course, about God. I also write books about God and about Jesus and about prayer and those kinds of things. So it is a continuation of the ministry of the word.
Your book was also the New York Times bestseller, and I believe also Pope Francis. Is that correct? He also did a an opening for that, and at the same time, he was also appointed. What a feeling that must have been for you.
Yeah, it was very exciting. So my most recent book is a book called Work in Progress.
Hmm.
It's a memoir of growing up in the 1960s and 70s and eventually finding God. But the book before that, as you say, was a book on the raising of Lazarus called Come Forth.
Hmm.
And the paperback version carried an introduction by Pope Francis. Yeah, I was delighted. In fact, funny enough, my publisher, when it came out in Italian, approached him and said, would you do this? Excuse me, I approached him and said, would you do this forward? And he said, no, I'm too busy. I don't really do forwards. And then I think a couple of months later, the Italian language publisher got a forward from him, just hand delivered, after he read the book, and we used that obviously in the Italian language edition and in the English language paperback edition. So no, I was delighted, and then he appointed me also, as you alluded to, as a consultant to the communications office in the Vatican. So yeah, there was a great on. Both of them were great honors.
And how was Pope Francis with you? He seems like a very delightful person when he was alive. Rest his soul. But how was he overall?
That's a great word for him, delightful. He was delightful. He was fun. He was
Hmm.
funny. One of the things I always said to people was that he's a great guy. He was
Hmm.
just a great guy. He's someone that you would want to spend time with, not in any way formal. Of course, I was formal with him because he's the Pope after all. He's my boss.
Sure.
And I just found him delightful and very supportive, very personable. Yeah, I mean, I still can't believe that I met him. I really, that was a unique experience for me. And I spent one-on-one time with him about 4 or 5 times, and then we would exchange notes from time to time. He was wonderful. It was, I really think, a holy person.
It's remarkable what you did, Father. Millions and billions of people would love to shake the hands of the Pope. People never get to that stage, so congratulations. I want to go more deep, Father, into spirituality. Do you think I want to go more. Has religion changed your life in terms of psychology and also how you think?
Yes, it has. I think religion has changed my life in every way. I think, sort of moving towards a more religious life and orienting your life around a person, around Jesus,
Hmm.
changes everything. It changes, with your motivation in life. It changes what you say, what you do, the decisions
Hmm.
you make, how you treat other people.
Hmm.
In terms of my psychology, that's interesting. I think that, God is always calling us to greater and greater freedom.
Hmm.
God is always also calling us to greater and greater love and charity. But I think freedom is a really important virtue for me. And you are free. In the Jesuits, we say you're free from any what's called disordered attachments, anything that would keep you from becoming the loving, charitable, generous person that God wants you to be. And so I think it's focused me a lot more on that idea of personal freedom,
Hmm.
which I think is a psychological move, right? I think that includes, from time to time I've sought out therapy because I think that's part of being freed. And I think those things work hand in glove with spiritual growth. I think psychological growth and emotional growth really go hand in hand with spiritual growth.
Do you also think, though, Father, go more deep now? Do you think? I mean, I come from a Hindustan Punjabi family. Not very strict. Mum and dad speak English at home. Grandma is X, Y, and Z. But I am actually kind of curious about more about God because I am very, very religious in terms of my spirituality. Every day I do my prayers at night, but I am scared of God because sometimes God can punish you. Do you agree or not agree?
I don't think, I mean, I think we should be in awe of God. I think it's important to have fear of God. But I think if our primary experience or understanding of God is as a judge or as someone who's going to punish us, that can get in the way of our own spiritual growth, right?
Mm, mm,
I also don't think God punishes in that way. I mean,
mm,
the difficulty with that sort of approach is that you look at people who might have some terrible illness or some terrible thing befall them and say, well, what did they do wrong? Right? When in fact, you look at, God forbid, like a child with cancer, right? I mean, God's not punishing that child for doing anything wrong. So I don't see God primarily as a judge. I mean, God's going to judge us in the end. God cares what we do.
Hmm.
But I think, our image of God, for the Christian, the image of God is Jesus,
Hmm.
basically. So that's how I see it. And Jesus is merciful, loving, and forgiving. So a lot of how people relate to God depends on their image of God. And actually, a lot of their images of God depends on their images of their parents, their mentors, teachers, right? So a
Hmm.
lot of times we have to invite people to at least look at their preconceived notions of who God is, which of course, our own understanding of God is necessarily limited. I mean, God's bigger than what we can imagine. So I think, and that's what Jesus is trying to do in the parables and by showing us different ways of understanding God and the reign of God.
Do you also think, though, Father, that God gives us obstacles to become who we want to be? Let's say, for instance, in order to become a businessman or very successful, there's always knockbacks. And sometimes us human beings, we end up saying, well, that's God's challenge. God will challenge us because you're so close to getting what you want. But then we don't blame God. We say, well, God is the reason why we've gone back a bit. Are we, as human beings, do we look at God and make him as a reason that we haven't made it?
I would say that we have challenges. Everybody has challenges that the world gives us, and that God enables us to get through them. That's how I would look at it.
Hmm.
Again, if you take that approach, then you say that anything that happens is something that's being given to you by God, and it's a challenge. Again, well, my child has cancer. Well, that's just a challenge that God's giving you, and you need to overcome it. And that really makes God into some sort of monster, right? That God is giving a parent a child with cancer so that the parent can somehow progress. I mean, I think that the children get cancer and people get cancer, because of just the world we're in, right? We're limited. We have human bodies, right? We're not perfect. The key is, where do you find God in all that, right? And where might you see God's grace sort of in the middle of that experience? But I don't think God overtly gives us challenges. I may be wrong. I mean, I'll get to heaven, I might find out that I'm wrong. But I think again, if we look at God in that way, then we end up making God out to be a little bit of a monster and a little bit of a puppet master too, which I think that's not the God we find in the Gospels.
I want to have a debation with you, Father. And it's great because you clearly are very intelligent. At the same time, you will know more about faith than I will. I can only be as an outsider. But you being
Well, you know more about Hinduism than I do, that's for
well,
sure.
yeah, but you're correct. I mean, my Hindu, yeah, you're right. But irrespective of that, you know, it's. My other question now is in terms of religion. Do you think, in your personal opinion, that sometimes that people do bad stuff? Just imagine you do, nine bad stuff a day, and at the same time, people go to the mosque or they go to the Hindu temple or they go to the church and they ask for forgiveness, but at the same time, they repeat their behavior. Does that sometimes trigger you personally that that human beings are tending to do the wrong stuff, but at the same time ask for forgiveness and then repeat the same behavior the next day?
Yeah, it happens all the time. I mean, I think, as because of human nature, and I tend not to think that it is because people are devious or deceitful or trying to trick God. I think it's just human nature. People are weak, they're trying. I heard a really interesting comment from a Catholic moral theologian named Father James Keenan, and this was I think, this is more of a kind of Christian approach to it, which is that Jesus does not critique people who are weak but trying, right? Like let's say you always gossip and you're constantly confessing it and you're constantly trying to overcome it, but you just keep falling into that habit. Jesus is generally not critiquing those kinds of people who are trying. He is critiquing people who are strong but not bothering. I really like that. So people who, like in the case of the Good Samaritan, two people walk by the man who's been beaten by the side of the road. They could help, but they don't.
Hmm.
So my sense is that the judgment comes more on people who are not struggling and failing and but really trying, but people who are they just don't bother. So for example, we look at someone who might be very wealthy and they could help the poor and they could help people who are homeless or migrants or refugees or whatever, but they just don't bother. They could, but they don't. That in my sense, and this again is an insight from Father Jim Keenan, I think that's where kind of Jesus locates sin more often in the Gospels. People who are strong but not bothering, not weak and trying.
Does that show that people, I mean, obviously, I don't know the statistics out there, but in terms of successful people, they have this theory that the most intelligent or the most successful people believe in God. But at the same time, the example you said about someone who has clearly made so much fortune and success, but they don't give back to the community. So my question is, do you think, is that is that theory not correct?
Which theory? I'm sorry, I'm not following you.
Sorry, Fab. What I'm trying to say is people that are top of the food chain, for instance, the
Right.
most successful people who are trying their best to get there, who have got there. Sometimes they say people that are top of the food chain always believe in God.
Oh.
What's
Yeah,
your
well,
thought?
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they might say that they believe in God, but I mean, I'm just going to take the Christian point of view. But if they're not helping the poor and taking care of people and being loving and forgiving, I mean, belief is one thing, but kind of putting it into practice is another. In the
Mm.
Gospels, Jesus says, not everybody who says, Lord, Lord, will get into the kingdom of heaven. In other words, it's not enough just to say, Jesus is my Lord or I believe in God.
Mm.
You have to kind of walk the walk and talk the talk too, right? You have to really put that into action. And right? It's
Absolutely.
otherwise what are you doing? It's like saying, "Well, I'm a really kind and generous person," and then you go beat somebody up or you cheat somebody. Well, it's fine to say that, but your actions are not really uh, kind of indicative of that.
You're a man of Christ. As a father, you would obviously have your personal opinion, and you're entitled to your opinion. Now, my question is, obviously, as you know, religion does segregate. We segregate each other around the world, including Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism. We've got this sort of thing where we're all separated, but at the same time, God is God. Why do you think that is, Father, that the world is separated and one has to believe in X, Y, and Z, and the one has to believe in A, B, C, and we're kind of marginalized, and then we segregate ourselves together, and then it comes to violence, and then it comes to racism. Why is that, Father, in your opinion?
Well, I think first of it's historical reasons, right? So I think it's the same God. We all worship one God. Historical reasons. People, if you're born if you're born in India or Pakistan, you might be more likely to be Hindu. Just who your parents are, right? If you're born in the
Mm.
West, maybe you're more likely to be Christian. If you're born in Israel, you're more likely to be Jewish, and on. If you're born in Thailand, maybe you're Buddhist, on and on and on. So a lot of it is historical and cultural, right? I mean, people belong to religions, and not in a bad way, but it's a cultural. It's part of the culture, right? So if you're an Italian American, you were almost always Catholic. That's just part of the culture and part of the history. And I think human nature, unfortunately, makes people who we don't agree with or we don't understand into the other, into the enemy, which is awful. I mean, I don't think this is what God wants. There are different paths to God. For me as a Christian, Jesus is the path. But I don't think it's surprising. I mean, even if you go to Jerusalem, and even if you go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest place in the Christian world where Jesus was crucified and then rose from the dead, in the middle of Jerusalem, you have Christian denominations in the church who run different parts of the church, Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Armenian, I think maybe Greek Orthodox. I'm not sure exactly. There's four of them. They disagree with each other, right? So even within that holy place, there are disagreements within the Christian world and within the Catholic world and within the Orthodox world. So it's not surprising. I think it's human nature. I do think that though more and more religious leaders, like for example, Pope John Paul, Pope Benedict, Pope Francis, Pope Leo, work for unity, not only unity among Christians, but interfaith unity, which I think is all to the good.
Absolutely, Father. I agree with you. Now, racism. Racism is a huge thing in terms of the world. Do you ever think, in your personal opinion, Father, yes, you've said this is historical, and we know what the world is like, and I know what the world is like being a man of color. How I'm able to be part of a society, but at the same time, will the other person get the job first compared to me? I mean, that's a question that I will, the question I've seen and been in situations before, regardless how much experience I have. But do you ever think racism will end up being conquered, or do you think it will always be there?
Oh boy. Well, it's a sin for the Catholic Church. It's a sin.
Hmm.
I think John Paul said that. So it's sinful. It's important to state that up front. Gosh, will that ever be overcome? Poof. I mean, I hope so, but we're so far from that. And again, I think it is this idea of a person as the other and as dangerous, and also as the scapegoat. We see a lot of that in the United States now, people being scapegoated. Interestingly, Jesus's stories in the stories about Jesus in the Gospels are often stories about him reaching out to people who were seen as beyond the pale,
Hmm.
right? So Samaritans, people with leprosy, Roman centurions, tax collectors. And, in a lot of his parables, it's about the outsider who is, shown to be the compassionate one. So for example, the Good Samaritan, we tend to forget, we think, oh, be a good Samaritan. But the Samaritans at the time were real sort of religious enemies of the Jewish people, and they would have been seen as foreign and different and strange. And, Jesus is reminding us that, I mean, really, we're all brothers and sisters under God.
My other question now, Father, is evil. Now, it's very easy for people to do bad stuff because it's easier to do bad than to do good. Or at the same time, as I've always said, well, not always said, but I've always said people hard work. People like to find a solution, easy solution. Now, in terms of evil, people like, well, not everyone. That's not really statistics, but people like to do. It's easier to do bad than good. Why do we do that as human beings, Father?
Once again, human nature. I mean, I can't explain the mystery of evil and why people do these things, but I think we're imperfect. We're not saints. We're not God. We're not Jesus.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, we tend to do things that are selfish.
Hmm.
I think most evil comes from selfishness and ingratitude, right? And in a sense, in jealousy too.
Hmm.
So it's human nature. I think, religions that don't admit that, and I think almost every religion understands that, that there is human nature, and that we have to sometimes combat it. Now, I mean, there's parts of us that are holy and beautiful. In the Jesuits, we have an expression that we are all loved sinners, love sinners. So we're all sinful. That doesn't mean we're going around killing people or, punching people in the face all the time. We're not all
Hmm.
terrible criminals. But,
Hmm.
we all have failings and we all have flaws and we're selfish, so we're sinful, but we're still loved by God. The reason why people do it though is still pretty mysterious. I mean, God did not make us perfect for whatever reason, because that takes away our free will too.
No, absolutely, Father, absolutely. Also, greed. I want to talk
Yeah.
more on greed. As you know, human beings will do anything to get money. Everybody wants to be rich and famous, but at the same time, there's that slogan in life that you can't take your money with you. I know money is a necessity, but how far is it for someone to do bad stuff or good stuff to get there? And then when you get to a certain age, you can't take your money with you. Do you think the world has got so concerned about wealth and trying to prove and become famous and successful that we end up not really enjoying the moment and actually appreciating what we have?
Yes, I think having what we have is a really important spiritual move. I think some parts of the world are obsessed with it. Certainly, I see this in the United States and in the West. Money becomes the kind of measure, the ruler by which you measure how important a person you are, how successful you are, how valuable you are,
Hmm.
right? And I think, I've often thought that, and I went to business school and worked for GE for a while. I've often thought that one of the last taboos in our society is asking someone how much they make.
Hmm.
If you think about it, almost everything else is up for discussion. Oh, I'm having the surgery, or oh, my marriage broke up, or oh, had this fight with somebody, or, oh, well, I've been fired, or what, all those things, even though those are very personal things, or my parent is sick or something, they're very personal, but they're not taboo. If you're at
Hmm.
a dinner party, say, by the way, I heard your mother was sick, how's she's doing? That's sort of seen as a compassionate question.
Hmm.
If you ask someone how much money do you make, that is, at least in the United States, that is complete taboo and a complete seen as completely offensive. Now, why is that? I mean, it's just a number. Who cares, right? It's not about, it doesn't inhere in the person, but it is because I think that it ranks people. Because if you're at a dinner party and you say, how much do you make? And the person says, I make $1 million a year, suddenly they become higher than the person who asks, who maybe makes $50,000 a year, right?
Hmm.
And it's kind of brutal that way. So I think that we tend to put so much emphasis and meaning on wealth, right? I mean, everybody has to live, everybody has to make some money to support themselves and their family if they have families. But it is a kind of sort of brutal measure. And I think that's one of the reasons why that question is so taboo.
Hmm. Are you content, Father? I mean, you've achieved a lot in your life in terms of being a writer, in terms of as a religion. But do you have still fire in your stomach that you want to go for more success, or are you happy where you are?
Well, it depends what you mean by success. I mean, I took a vow of poverty, so I don't have any money. I have a vow of chastity, so I'm not married. A vow of obedience, so I can't exactly say where I'm going to end up, right? I
Hmm.
mean, if my the Jesuit superior says I want you to move out of this job, I have to do it. I have a burning desire for other things, for helping people find God, for trying to be a good person, for, as I said, freeing myself of these disordered attachments. Yeah, but not the kind of financial success. I mean, I would say that, excuse me, when I write books, I want the book to be successful. I want people to read it. But it is not out of a sense of I need to prove myself or I need to make more money than anybody else because all the money I make goes to the Jesuits anyway. So I'm not that. That's not a motivation. Not that kind of success.
Hmm. Are you happy though, Father? I mean, in your life? I mean, yes, we spoke
Sure.
about content in terms of business, but are you internally happy?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I'm happy
Um,
with what I'm doing. Happy with where I am. I'm happy with where I'm going.
Fantastic. And do you? And I don't know if you have children or not, but do you want your family or your children to follow in your footsteps, or are you the sort of father, as a role model to people that come to the Catholic Church, and also at the same time father at home? Do you want your children to follow in your footsteps, or do you want your children to follow in their own footsteps or live their own lives?
Yeah. So as a Catholic priest, we take a vow of chastity and a
Oh,
promise of
my
celibacy.
apologies. I
That's
apologize.
okay. That's
Um,
okay. No, that's
my brain was
okay.
moving. My brain was
That's
moving.
okay. No,
Sorry, Father.
that's okay. So I don't
I
have.
will edit it out. Let me
That's okay.
let me just. Sorry, Father. My
All right.
apologies.
It's not nothing to be embarrassed about.
Sorry. I want to talk about AI, Father. AI, as you know, has changed the world, and obviously, as you know, social media has become technology, and now the hard work is taken out. And I don't know how it is implemented, but implemented around the world in terms of governments, in terms of education. I don't know what it's like in religion, but how do you personally see, obviously as a writer, being an op-ed for the New York, written for the New York Times, writing books? How do you think AI is good, or do you think do you think it's a dangerous tool to have?
Well, first of all, I would recommend people read Pope Leo's encyclical Magnificat Humanitas, which is about human dignity in the age of AI. That's the best I could say. I mean, that's a very thorough and comprehensive and inspiring document. I mean, I think there are certain things that AI does well. I mean, like, for example, maps, right? Helping you find your way somewhere. I mean, in a sense, that's a kind of AI where you're driving in a car and it says turn right, turn left. You can even pick the accent that you want. I mean, that's helpful.
Hmm.
I think when it sort of pushes people out of their livelihoods and when it starts to make people think that an AI generated model is better than a human model, I think we're in trouble, right? And
Hmm.
I think when it sort of pushes up against human dignity, I think we're in trouble. I generally think of it as more bad than good, because most of the things that I've seen have been not good, right? I mean, people losing their jobs, and I don't see it as a kind of net benefit for mankind, other than some kind of menial tasks. And I think that there is very little regulation going on, and at least I'm not an expert. I saw an article about robots in China, right? That are starting to be able to move kind of on their own. I thought, everyone knows where this is going to end up, and it's going to end up in terms of violence and subjugating people and the haves and the have-nots. I think one of the insights from Pope Leo's encyclical was that the people who are affected need to make decisions. It can't just be a group of a few hundred people in the world that are making these huge decisions about the future of mankind. So I generally think it's not good. I mean, I'm not a Luddite, right? And I use it from time to time. I certainly don't use it to help me write. I mean, I think that's immoral. I mean, not immoral, but I don't think that's ethical to try to pass that off as your own stuff. And I also fear for the kinds of stuff that I see on the internet. Someone sent me a clip of a movie that was completely AI. I had no idea it was AI. That's dangerous because pretty soon people are going to have a hard time distinguishing between AI and reality, which is dangerous. At least that's how I see it.
Do you think it's dangerous for religion as well at some point in the
That's a
future?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what a good question. I certainly think from a sort of baseline standpoint that preachers should not be asking Chat GBT to come up with homilies. That's one thing. I saw an article recently about someone who had come up with an AI version of himself as a pastor because he couldn't meet everybody's needs. Well, neither could Jesus. Jesus didn't heal every single person in Judea and Galilee. So who are we to think that we're better than that? But I do think that I think the other big question is this idea of transhumanism, that we can somehow transcend human nature, transcend humanity, and that the AI robot or drone or whatever you want to call it or creation is better than the human. I think that's really dangerous because eventually what happens is you say, well, let's get rid of the people who are not efficient, right? Let's either fire them, and let's maybe even like kind of warehouse them. They're not efficient. They're not doing the work. We can have AI do the work a lot better. That's very dangerous. So I think we really have to be careful.
Do you think it makes human beings lazy, Father, at some point as well? I mean, I spoke to recently a professor at MIT, Dr. Robert Langer. He was the co-founder of Moderna, and I asked him a question about people that go to university knowing that they can write an essay, or they don't need to write an essay, they can put it in ChatGPT to make it. And at the same time, then you'll have people at top who are in our institutions or professors who really don't have any knowledge. They're relying on AI. Is that scary for you to know that, Father?
Yes, and I do think it can make us lazy. And I've seen those stories and studies about students who, I mean, they don't read and they don't read the book. They ask ChatGPT if I wanted to read, Pride and Prejudice. I'll just say to ChatGPT, summarize Pride and Prejudice, right, by Jane Austen, and then write me a paper. And I've also heard write me a paper in my style, in the style that I write in. That's very dangerous because the person doesn't engage with Pride and Prejudice or with Jane Austen. The person is just engaging with the Chat GPT. I think it's very dangerous. I also just saw an article recently that said that it is making online learning almost impossible. I mean, not the kind of stuff you're doing with your podcast, but if you go into a classroom and the teacher never sees you and it's all done virtually, it's very easy to it's very easy to kind of cheat. So I think it is very dangerous.
I think most of our viewers would love to know us to speak more about spirituality. Um, what happens when we die, Father? I mean, obviously we've got that thing where when we die we go to heaven, and obviously you have your beliefs as a priest. I'll have my beliefs as a Hindu. He'll have his beliefs as a Muslim. He'll have his beliefs as a Jewish. But what happens to our soul, Father? Do you think we see our parents again in the future, or do you think that's it when it's done?
According to me and according to the Christian worldview, yeah, it's not done. I mean, death is not the end.
Hmm.
And Jesus shows us this. He tells us this in the Gospels. He shows us this by raising Lazarus. He reveals it finally in the resurrection. This is the This is the plan that God has for all of us. And I often say to people who might not get that or have a hard time with that, if God has a relationship with you now on earth in life, this loving and caring and fulfilling, why would God end that? Why would God let death, something as small as death, end that? So absolutely. Um, and I do believe that we're reunited with our friends and family because I think that's something that is part of perfect happiness. So yeah, I do believe that.
Is this world a test, Father, before we get to heaven?
I think it's something of a test. I don't think that's the reason that God has us in this world. I think God has us in this world to enjoy the world. The old catechism answer is we are here to praise, reverence, and love God, right? And to serve him in this world and to be happy with him in the next. I think that's a pretty good understanding of what it means to be a human being on the earth. But I don't think it's just a test, like a test that we have to pass in order to get to heaven. Again, I may be wrong. I mean, we'll see what happens, when I hopefully meet God at some point. Hopefully not for a while.
But wouldn't we say, Father, that people who are not as privileged or, compared to this person or or the other person across the road who has a fancy car, for instance, and they'll say, well, they've managed to get out the system and become fortunate, but majority, 90% of the world is still having to pay taxes, go to work, go to sleep. They have this very up survival, uh, mentality. How can we convince them people that this is not a test then at the same time we're having to pay bills, etc., to live, and if we don't pay bills then we become poor?
Well, I mean, not to generalize, but I think a lot of people who live more simply often are more religious.
Hmm.
So it's generally not the rich convincing the poor that there's a God. It's usually the poor convincing the rich that there's a God. Because again, this is a generalization, but oftentimes it's in my experience that the poor are more aware of their need for God, right, and their reliance on God, and so God is more present to them. They feel God's presence more. They're more attentive to God's presence. Whereas oftentimes rich people say, "I did it all myself. What do I need?" So I think it may be a little bit the opposite.
How do you deal with jealousy, Father? Obviously, as a priest, you'll have your
Yeah.
opinion. You deal with people
Uh,
that, in Hinduism, we say nazar. Nazar is in a Hindi word. It's like people that don't want good for you, or they wish bad on you. How do you deal with that?
well, it's funny you should say that. I just preached about that last night
Hmm.
because there's a gospel story where Jesus tells it's a great parable. It's a parable of the workers in the vineyard, and there are some workers that go out into the vineyard in the morning at 9 o'clock. Other workers go out at 3 o'clock, and then some have been waiting around all day, and they go out at 5 o'clock. And in the parable, the vineyard owner pays the people who are at 9 o'clock the full day's wage, people who are at 3 o'clock the full day's wage, but people who are at 5 o'clock at the full day's wage. And the people who worked earlier are, what do you think? They're jealous and they're angry. Why are you paying them the full day's wage? And the vineyard owner says, why are you jealous? I gave you what you deserved, and why shouldn't I be generous with people? So that sort of creates a jealousy. I think one of the ways to handle jealousy is to recognize that the person you're looking at and falsely perceiving them as having a perfect life or everything's going great for them is not. And we all sort of live a life of sort of mixed bag of good and bad, right? And I think jealousy and envy comes when we falsely compare what we know to be our mixed bag life of good and bad with this sort of fantasy of the other person's perfect life, which is not the case. And so, yeah, I think the antidote for jealousy is reality. That this person doesn't have it perfect. That a person who has I mean, we all know the stories of wealthy people or celebrities or people who just seem so successful who end up being really miserable, right? Or whose lives end really tragically through suicide, right? I'm not critiquing, those situations. It's a real tragedy. But what I'm saying is that, wealth and fame and power do not necessarily bring happiness, but we tend to be jealous of people in those situations, or even good, perceived attractiveness, right? Or charisma. That those don't necessarily bring happiness. And I think one of the antidotes to jealousy is reminding ourselves of that.
I also want to ask you a question, Father, something that you'll be much more experienced than I am, because I feel like I'm suffering for the moment. It's so privileged to have this conversation with you. I'll probably never get to meet someone like you again. I mean, it's very lucky that I'm very honored and very privileged that you responded to my email and my message. So I'm going to take this opportunity. What would you say? Well, what's your thoughts on, just imagine, let's say, for instance, you're trying to build a business or a podcast, for instance. Let's just say anything. And the higher you try and get, there's a spirit there, there's a bad spirit that doesn't want you to go any further. And every time you get close to that, it pulls you down. And then you have to stand up again. And then every time you get a bit more further, it takes you down. Is that is that an evil spirit that's around an individual? Or do you think that's just life?
The bad spirit, is that interiorly, like you're telling yourself I can't do this, or
Well,
something
not
from
not
the
not I can't
outside
do
happens?
I can't do this because some people are very ambitious and they have this sort of mentality that they're very resilient. But obviously, it gets tiring, Father. But every time you get close to something, I feel like every time I get close to there, something pushes me down.
I
Every
see.
time I get
Okay.
close to there, it pushes me down. And I know that's not my mentality because I'm a person that just wants to keep going and going. But I feel like there's an evil spirit around me, and it's been around me for a long time. It's never allowed me to go up on the sea level. Is that? Do you think that there's a? Do you think that's an evil spirit, not just in me, but anyone who wants to climb the ladder?
No, I think the evil spirit would be the spirit that tells you that you can't do it because you're not worthy or because you're not working hard enough. That's where the evil spirit can come in to really pull you away from God. I think that's just life. I mean that life just, the world has these different obstacles that you have to fight. I think that the good spirit is the spirit that says keep going, right? Keep going. You are worthy, you are valuable, you're hardworking. The bad spirit is the spirit that says, "Oh, I don't deserve this. Everything's against me. Everyone is sort of conspiring against me." No, I just think that's life. I mean, look, I've had struggles in my life, but again, it's not seeing that as a kind of punishment, and it is also not seeing it as, you have some sort of black cloud around you. So I think that the bad spirit is the spirit that tells you somehow that you're unworthy around you by having a big head. That's
Hmm,
something that's within your control.
hmm,
If you get pulled down by saying, "Oh, this is never going to work and I'm going to give up," that's within your control.
hmm.
That's what I'm saying. So it's distinguishing between what is within your control and what is interior, with what is extrinsic to you and beyond your control. I mean, for example, if that's a hurricane that comes and blows down your house, that's not your fault,
Hmm.
and it doesn't mean that you're cursed. No more than it means that every single other person who's lost this house is cursed. But on the other hand, if you're always saying to yourself, "Oh, I'm the greatest person in the world and screw everybody else," and people start to dislike you or mistrust you or oppose you because of that, that's within your control. So that's more the bad spirit, I would say, if that
Do
makes
you
sense.
understood, Father? But do you think praying every day makes us more successful? Because people, as you know, human beings say, the more I pray, the more I get. Do you think that
No, because
ideology is true?
no, no, not at all. Because there are a lot of people who pray who have terrible things happen to them, basically. And I think prayer enables you to see where God is more easily in the circumstances and feel God's presence. But I mean, again, the problem with that approach is that means that people who are not successful, who are sick, are not praying or are not holy. And I know plenty of people in the hospital, like right now, who are very holy people who are praying. It's not their fault. So, there's a great line in the Gospels, I think it's in John's Gospel, where Jesus is presented with a man who was born blind. And he is asked by the people, who sinned that this man was born blind? He or his parents? And Jesus says, no one. So it's really important to kind of combat that thinking that somehow it's our fault or we're getting punished or we're not praying hard enough. So no, I I I don't know, I don't agree with that. So I think it's important to look at how Jesus kind of presents things.
What does prayer do, Father? If I go to the mosque or the temple or the church, spiritually, then, if prayer is not always the answer in itself, what does prayer do for us as human beings?
Yeah, I think prayer is one way that we have of entering into relationship with God, right? Prayer is raising your mind and your heart to God. Prayer is a sort of a meditation on where God is. Prayer is a conversation with God. I think it's a conversation that happens in the midst of a relationship. So it's the same kind of relationship like if you have with a friend or a spouse or your children. It's not transactional. It's not like I spend time with my wife or my husband or my children in order that I get rich or in order that this thing happens. It's because you love them and you want to come to know them. And so that's what part of what prayer is. And of course we ask for things in prayer. That makes sense, but we sometimes don't get them. I think the focus though is on the relationship. So I don't see prayer as like transactional. If I say these, I mean, I ask for things, but I don't say if I pray this certain way, I'm going to get this. Because again, that then you get into the problem of looking at people who are seemingly unlucky, who are still religious, who are still praying. So, yeah, so prayer is about the relationship, I would say. I just want to be careful. I am wrapping up at 1:45, if that's okay.
No problem,
Thank
Father.
you.
No problem. No problem, Father. Let me just make sure you are good for 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Also, Father, to also ask you, when you say prayer, now obviously, if you ask God for money, does that insult him?
I think you're going to ask God for good things, right? If you're poor and you need help and your children are starving, I don't think it's bad to ask God for money. But if you're super rich and that's all you're asking God for, give me more and more money, there's something going on, right? So it has to be sort of seen in the context of the relationship and in the context of the individual. So again, if a person who's starving in Sudan asks God to help me with money or food, why wouldn't they ask for that? That's part of being in an honest relationship with God and in an open relationship with God. But if you're a trillionaire, I guess there's one, Elon Musk, or a billionaire, let's say, and you say, I want more money, you know, I think that's not healthy.
What advice, Father, would you give? Obviously, you've established yourself very well in terms of a status on social media, etc. What advice would you give to young people out there that want to believe in God, but at the same time, when they do believe in God, they want to use God as a way, or they want to believe that God will do the 100% for them if they go to church or the mosque or the Hindu temple, and they want to be successful.
Yeah,
What would you tell them?
yeah, good question. I would say first of all, if you're looking for God, look around for signs of God's presence in your life already, because they're going to be there, and trust that, right? And follow that and see where that leads. If it leads to a church or a mosque or a synagogue that you feel comfortable in, then follow that, right? But I think that if the idea is that if I believe in God, I'm going to get good things, to remember that, part of the Christian life is suffering. I mean, Jesus dies on a cross, right? And so he says, take up your cross and follow me. So part of the Christian life is going to be suffering. And look, part of any life, you're a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Jew, a Muslim, your life is going to have some suffering, right? And so I think, all you have to do is look around at people who are religious, and that's clear. So I think to do it in a way that where it is transactional, if I believe in God, I'm going to get $1 million, you're going to be disappointed. You might get that $1 million, but it's not as a result of, and maybe God inspires you to work hard and to sort of be a good person. And in that way, you could say God kind of helps you through that. But it is not simply a result of belief that people get rich. And because we also know a lot of people who are pretty hateful people and who are rich. So,
And my last question to you, Father, then I will ask you to do one last thing for me. Uh, Ambition. Do you think in order to become successful, you have to be consistent? They obviously say, someone to be like Elon Musk is obviously something that's extraordinary. Not everyone can get to that level in terms of doing that or being a president or a prime minister. But do you think being highly, highly obsessed about something gives you that pathway to success?
I think in time, it at times it can. It can also make you distracted and not a good person and someone who doesn't work well with other people if you're just obsessed with one thing. If you're obsessed with just money or your own fame or your own power, you may not be able to work with people, and that will work against you. But I think certainly ambition plays a role in it. The question is, again, what's the ambition for? Is it just for your glory and your power, or is it to help other people too?
So in other words, people end up being want to have power and money because of selfishness, basically.
It depends. I mean, it's hard to generalize, but I would say that ambition needs to be checked by a sense of charity and responsibility.
Absolutely, Father. And Father, while you're here, would you be so kind enough to make a prayer for me and you? Is that okay if we're able to do a prayer?
Yeah, of course. So we just take
Thank
a
you, Father.
moment and thank God for the opportunity to be together and to think about these deep questions, and that people listening might open their minds and their hearts to God and to God's presence in their lives. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Father.